So, in this lecture, we are going to see post-colonialism, right? We are going to see post-colonialism, right? Post-colonialism is a sister concept to postmodernism. It is a concept which is derived from postmodernism and similar to postmodernism. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism is rejection of essentialism, rejection of meta narratives, rejection of discourses, right? This is what postmodernism is, and postcolonialism is only that. It is rejection of colonialism, right? Rejection of colonialism, rejection of colonial view of life, rejection of colonial language, rejection of colonial ways, rejection of colonial institutions. What post-colonialism is trying to do is this: to reject the language, ways, institutions of colonial colonial entities. And in particular, what is post-colonialism? In particular, post-colonialism is it is rejection of colonial academics. Colonial academics, right? Colonial academics. What is colonial academics? Right? What is colonial academics? Now, imagine you are in Africa, right? You are in Africa. Africa has no Africa has no tradition of academics. They have no universities to study their own history. So history in Africa is didactic, whereby oral history is there. That history is transmitted orally, right? Now, these African countries are under foreign rule, are colonialized. Colonialized are under foreign rule. African countries are under foreign rule. These African countries, when under foreign rule, will will be studied by their colonial masters, and these colonial masters will write history of the countries which they rule in their own way, right? They will write history which suits them the best, right? So to give example related to Africa, to give history of Africa in the words of colonial masters, I will take the discipline of anthropology. Anthropology. Anthropologist, what anthropology, the discipline in essence was to give justification of superiority of white race, right? Anthropology, what it tried to do was to gather such evidence which suggested that white are better people than Africans, right? Black race is uh, is secondary to white race. This is what anthropology is trying to do or tried to do, right? So the colonial history of Africa was very much written by white people. Anthropology of Africa was very much written by white people, right? Now this colonialism in academics is what post-colonialism is trying to reject. Rejection of colonial academics, academics or books which has been written by white people, about Africans, about Indians, about people of color everywhere, right? This is what post-colonialism is trying to reject such knowledge systems which has been written about colonial world by their colonial masters, right? This is what post-colonialism is trying to do. Rejection of colonial academics, rejection of such disciplines, such books which has been written by the colonial masters about them, right? I gave you example of anthropology, where anthropology as a discipline emerged as whites wanted to establish their supremacy over blacks by name of science, right? So what post-colonialism is rejection of colonial academics, right? To start to start there is this scholar known as Edward Said. Edward Said was an Egyptian, right? He was an Egyptian, and Edward Said is actually the pioneer. He is pioneer of post-colonialism. Post-colonialism started with Edward Said. He was the first person to make this view popular that in academics, everything about the colonial world is written by the colonial masters. So everything that will be written will be in favor of colonial masters, and that academic literature will try to portray colonial world as secondary, right? What Edward Said is trying to do. Edward Said is trying to do one thing, is trying to dehegemonize dehegemonize academics from Western intelli- intelligentsia, right? Intelligentsia and civil society. Western academics. This is what Edward Said is trying to do. It is trying to dehegemonize academics from Western intelligentsia, right? Western scholars. To dehegemonize academics, what Edward says does it, he applies knowledge power connection to the knowledge that was feeded to colonial world. He applies knowledge power connection, and he gives this concept of Orientalism. He gives this concept of Orientalism. What is knowledge power connection? Knowledge power connection, as we have understood, it means that every knowledge, every knowledge has some power backing it, and power establishes knowledge at as well, right? This is knowledge, this is power. We have understood power establishes knowledge, and knowledge establishes power as well, right? He he applied this concept of knowledge power connection is in context of colonies, whereby he says that power of colonial countries, power of countries like Britain, was established in India through knowledge which they propagated in India. What British did to establish their power in India, they said that we are ruling for betterment of you, right? We are ruling for betterment of you. Knowledge power connection, and this knowledge power connection in Oriental world he calls Orientalism. In colonial world he calls Orientalism, He has book of the same name, Orientalism. Orientalism is also the book of his name. What Orientalism is trying to say, what Orientalism is trying to say is that knowledge of Orient is actually the word for colonies. Colonies is written by colonial masters, right? And we have to reject this knowledge, right? Right? Why? Because, as I have said, there is no history of writing in Orient, right? History in Orient was oral tradition. So like Chinese whisper, from one generation to one other generation, history changed a lot, right? History in Orient or history in colonies was oral, was didactic, right? So history was not written. Then then he says that history of colonies or Orient is written by colonial masters to establish their power. History of colonies, hmm, history of colonies, history of colonies or Orient is a way of West to establish their power, right? For which he says that history of Orient is product of West, product of West, right? Product of West. History of Orient is product of West, right? Connect it to knowledge power connection again, whereby history of Orient or history of colonies or history of Eastern world, history of Eastern world, let's assume it to be knowledge, and it is written by Western countries to establish their power, to establish their power. This is what post-colonialism is trying to reject. This is what Orientalism is trying to say, right? This is what Orientalism is trying to say. That West West writ, West wrote history of East to establish its power on it. History of West was a product of project of West. Was a product of West. Was a project of West to establish its power. Right. So the history that was written like this. One is emanated, other can be transcendent. One is primary, one is secondary, other is primary. So history of East as written by West was like this, where East or colonies were emanated, were secondary, and West or colonial masters were were having opportunity of transcendence and they were primary, right? East was object, West was subject. East was other, West was self, right? Right. This is what Orientalism is trying to say. That history of our people has been written by other people to establish their supremacy on us. Right? This is what Edward Said is trying to do. The next scholar is Franz Fanon. Franz Fanon or Fanon. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Franz Fanon. In his book, Wretched, The Wretched of Earth, Black Skin and White Mask. Right? Black skin and white mask. Right? A person who is black. Right? This is a person of color. Suppose this is a black person. Right? What colonialism is trying to do, what colonial academic is trying to do, is to give this person a mask of whiteness. Right? Right? We uh, we have recently seen this debate on Indian education system, whereby Modi ji says that we should reject Macaulay's education system. We should reject English education system. Right? What was the goal of Macaulay's education system as written by him to his father? Right? Macaulay, in his words, wrote this, whereby I intend to write or produce such a system of education which will produce such Indians, such Indians who will be Indian by color only, but by all other virtues will be British. Right? This is what the project of Macaulay was, to produce such Indians who will be by color Indian, but by all other virtues British. This is what Franz Fanon is trying to say, whereby people will have black skin, but they will wear a white mask, whereby they will be limited to the sensibilities which will be provided to them by the knowledge which is given to them by their colonial masters. Right? Black skin, white mask. Right? What Franz Fanon does is he applies psychoanalysis. He applies psychoanalysis to understand how colonialism colonialism has made a person of color a discourse of itself, a discourse of itself. Right? He applied psychoanalysis. When you see people from Africa, people from India, people from the tropical area, people from tropical area wearing suits. Right? People, suits is not an attire of tropical area. Still, people of tropical area wear suits. Why? Because they have been psychologically mended in this way that we have to wear suits to be professional. Is it true? Your professionality does not stem from suits. Your professionality stems from the knowledge you have, the way you conduct yourself. But still, there is this view that you have to wear suits to appear professional. In tropical area, in areas which have a lot of heat, suits are not an ideal attire, right? But we have been psychologically mended in a such a way that we think that suits are professional and suits are absolutely essential to appear professional, right? And the solution and this solution which Franz Fanon gives is violence. use violence to break barriers of colonialism, use violence to regain confidence. Right? The next scholar is Homi K. Bhabha. This is not Homi Bhabha, this is some other scholar. Do not confuse. In my first reading of political science, I was confused that what a great man Homi Bhabha was. This is different Homi Bhabha. This is not the nuclear scientist Homi Bhabha, right? Homi K. Bhabha. In his book Location of the Culture, he gives concept of he gives concept of hybridity. He gives concept of hybridity, whereby he suggests that every culture is hybrid culture, right? There is always the cultural exchange that happens, and two cultures cannot be seen in binaries and cannot be seen in dichotomy, right? Two cultures are not completely opposite to each other. There is no uh, two sides of coin, two sides of coin in cultures, but cultures are more hybrid than we understand. Cultures are more hybrid than we understand, right? We see Mughlai food. Mughlai food. We understand Mughlai food to be Indian. We understand that Mughlai food is Indian. Pakistanis will say it is our culture, right? Uzbekistani people say it will our culture because tandoor and all came from Uzbekistan, right? Samosa actually came from Iran and Samarkand and all those places. Samosa was a Middle Eastern thing. It came to India, right? When you understand this, that every culture is somewhat in some way has been shaped by other culture, you will understand the concept of hybridity, right? Even China, which is so secluded, so is in silo of itself. China is not a very open society, but the martial art culture that China has been through Indian monk, Indian Buddhist monk, right? He went to China and taught them martial arts, and which is now known as karate and all, right? So every culture is hybrid. Every culture is hybrid. Every culture is there has been cultural dialogue between societies. So cultural cannot be seen as dichotomous, right? Now, how this connects to post-colonialism? This connects to post-colonialism, whereby post-colonial scholars are trying to do what? Post-colonial scholars are trying to project themselves as superior, that they are superior of the two cultures. Against that, Homi K. Bhabha says that this is not true. Your culture cannot be superior than us because your culture and or our culture has been influencing each other. Right? I will give you one more example to make you understand how this concept is related to post-colonialism. Right? I will give you example of this. Sorry. I this English attire dungri, right? Dungri, whereby it is like this, right? And this all is covered. Dungiri. The Dungiri is actually the attire of Dongri people of Mumbai. English picked up the style from India and took there. Whose culture is this? Is this British culture, which is so soft, which is so chic, right? Or is it Indian culture, which is not so soft, which is not so chic, right? What what was fashion, what became fashion in Europe was actually day-to-day attire of Indians, right? So whose culture is superior? Is it Indian culture which wears something, or is it English culture which adopts this culture? I will give one more example. I will give you one more example. You know Kolhapuri chappals, right? Kolhapuri chappals, very famous in Maharashtra, very famous in India. Prada tried to make those chappals and marketed them as something else, right? So whose culture is that? Whose culture do you find supreme here? Whose culture do you find better here? Is it the Prada? Is it the Prada which which tried to take this culture to them, tried to appropriate this culture, or is it the local Kolhapuri artisans? Right? So culture cannot be seen in silos. Culture cannot be seen in binaries. Culture are not the two sides of coin. Cultures are not really different. Cultures are not mutually exclusive, but cultures are hybrid. This is what Homi K. Bhabha is trying to say. Then there is this scholar. The next scholar we are going to study is Gayatri Spivak. Gayatri Spivak. Gayatri Spivak. In her book, Can Subaltern Speak? Can Subaltern Speak? Right? Subaltern means subaltern means uh, more of a secondary thing, right? Subaltern are secondary, subaltern are marginalized. Can subaltern speak? What does this mean? Right? Can subaltern speak? So what Gayatri Spivak says is that to fight domination, to fight domination of colonialist, to fight history of colonialist, subaltern should produce its own history, right? This is the first thing she says this as a solution for marginalization of colonial world in academics, that colonial countries should produce their own history, right? But the issue is that can they produce, can they speak? It means, can they produce their own history? Can they produce their own history? Do they have any history to speak, right? Do they have any history to speak? If do they even have language to speak their history, and even if the colonial world produces the history, will the rest of the world listen, right? This is what Gayatri Spivak is trying to say, whereby she suggests that to break the domination of colonial world, what East should do, what colonies should do, is to produce their own history. But she is not really optimistic about this production of history, whereby she thinks that, is it possible to produce? Is it possible for the East to produce its own history? Is it possible? Can they speak? And even if they speak, even if they produce, will the rest of the world hear to it? Right? This is the views of Gayatri Spivak. So, what post-colonialism in essence is? It is immanence of East, immanence of colonies in academics. It is hybridity of culture, that the way Western academics, the Western academicians see East is through their own lens, whereby they see East and West are two mutually exclusive things. But scholars like Homi ke Bhabha says that these are not two mutually exclusive, but they are mutually inclusive, and they have some common ground to share. Right? Then there is this concept of high resistance, resistance as given by Frantz Fanon, whereby he says that violence is the solution to decolonize academics, to decolonize Orientalism, and to get away from Orientalism. So this was post-colonialism. I hope you understood post-colonialism. I enjoyed postmodernism a lot, right? This is a very complex topic. I think we have covered postmodernism in quite a detail, right? So this was postmodernism, and I hope you understood postmodernism. Very complex words, very complex things which have been used by postmodern scholars, but very fun to read nonetheless. I will see you in the next lecture, whereby we'll see more about ideologies, more about end of ideology, end of history, and how ideology in today's world has become redundant, not so useful. Right? I will see you in the next lecture. I hope this helped. Thank you so much.